लीजिएगा।
हाँ सर, प्लीज सर।
Thank you, dear Rajesh Agrawal ji, for the kind words which you spoke. My dear and respected elder brother Amar Mittal ji, Rajiv Kohli ji, all the organizers, and my dear professional brothers and sisters. First of all, thank you very much for taking out your precious time and for inviting me uh, to allow me to share my thoughts on this new subject. Though more than 4 years have passed since this act was introduced, but still there are many things. Rather, all the areas are mostly, I would say, untouched areas. When we read the smallest piece of legislation which has been brought, I will not say smallest, but very small, because there are still more small fiscal laws like Benami Act, etc. But the questions which when we read, we find are more than the answers which we are getting. And I must express it in the beginning itself, because the way law has been drafted, and for many reasons, it is difficult to decipher many of the hidden queries, hidden puzzles, hidden intricacies, and apparent complexities the way legislation has been drafted. Maybe the purpose was to achieve more than that was constitutionally or legally permissible. That is why probably law has been drafted in this manner, or there may be other reasons. But uh, the time will tell how the law evolves. Of course, with the passage of time, some clarifications are expected. But as of now, whatever reading we can do, and whatever answers we could decipher as per reading interpretation, multiple interpretations by myself or by my senior partner, Dr. Rakesh Gupta, my other partner, Somil, Raji, and everybody, many of the seasoned professionals like you, I have got the opportunity to interact. So the one unanimity which is coming out is that the things are not clear. Vagueness is there, uh, jumbling up is there, overlapping is there, overreach is there, overkill is there. Whatever you can imagine, it is there in the legislation. So I would like to be pardoned for not being clear enough in response to your queries, whatever queries you are going to raise. Though I will try to answer them with the utmost sincerity to the extent I could understand that. But believe me, this is a fabulous piece of legislation, and whether we get an opportunity to practice in this area or not, because number of cases are not going to be much larger to begin with. But the reading would be quite interesting. The study would be quite interesting as it unfolds new dimensions the way laws can be drafted. Number one. Number two, in times to come, I think it is going to hit the same way as today Benami law is hitting. When Benami law was introduced, at that time in an interview which was given in Economic Times, which was published in 2017, I said this is an unguided missile loaded with nuclear arsenal. And within 2-3 years, it has become, I would say, substantially true. Because the purpose for which a legislation is drafted, sometimes that is lost if it is not couched with full safety. The wording, the drafting is, if it is open-ended, then it can go either way. So I would, with the help of a small example, I would say the problem with a nuclear bomb is that it does not kill merely the target, but it kills something more than that. Many people are killed by the radiation, overreach of the radiation which happens. So similarly, these laws I would compare with that for the offenders, for the real culprit people, these are really nuclear bombs. But for the innocent persons also, they are going to have the effect of radiation in more than one way. Because slowly, gradually, it is going to cover up in those transactions also, where say the companies which are having international transactions, or any other persons other than companies also who are having international transactions, and if there is any laxity is observed by them in proper reporting or in proper disclosures, they may bear the brunt. Whenever the residential status is determined in the manner as now the amendments have been made out, the disclosure norms, if they are not followed in true sense, what can be the fallout? It is very difficult to imagine. But one thing is very sure, that all such persons need to be very, very careful. So, sir, with this, I would like to begin my deliberations today. Uh, PPT. Here is my PPT. And sir, the PPT is visible clearly?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Some voice is coming constantly from somewhere. Some commentary is going on somewhere. Some music or some other gadget is going on. Constant commentary is coming. Yeah, now it is not there. So, Black Money Act, as we all aware, as we are all aware about, that it was brought out in 2015. Since the present dispensation has come into power, not only Black Money Act, many more laws which are more than enough to rejig the economy, to streamline the economy, to plug all possible loopholes. And rather, I would say not only possible loopholes, but also to create a kind of fervor among the people. I mean, there are many more laws have been brought out, and this is one of them. And like others are PBPT Act, Fugitive Act, Fugitive Ordinance, which we all heard about, and then also huge substantial amendments made out in PMLA law and BUDS, BUDS, and many more such things. And this, believe me, this Black Money Act is going to be, I mean, really, really something which will be materially affecting all those who have done or who are willing to do any kind of international transaction, whether by fair means or by unfair means. Effect is going to be faced by all. For fair means, for by, because now that the way disclosure norms are there, have to be carefully followed in the right spirit, in the right context. So, as you all know, that the then finance minister, while presenting the union budget in 2015, presented a new self-contained law on taxing the black money. And the full name of the act is not Black Money Act. It is, the name is Black Money Undisclosed Foreign Income and Assets and Imposition of Tax Act. So as the name itself clarifies, somebody was asking whether it is taking care of the full black money. No, it is not taking the total black money into account. It is taking only that black money which is pertaining to the income earned from abroad or the sources located outside India, or the assets. I mean, the black money embedded in the assets located outside India. So it is not concerned with any kind of tax evasion which has happened from the income held in India or from the assets located in India. So that is why its name is Undisclosed Foreign Income and Assets. So it is taking care of two, and then imposition of tax thereon. So firstly, it was enacted on 26th May 2015. When the act was brought out, it was initially brought out with effect from 1st April 2016. But because of certain reasons, an amendment was brought out with the help of an executive order in pursuance to Section 86 of BMA. In short, we will call it as BMA, that is Black Money Undisclosed Foreign Income and Assets and Imposition of Tax Act 2015. And whenever I say act, I mean this BMA Act. So though Section 86 gives powers to the government to come out with some kind of clarification, some kind of amendment, some kind of notification to avoid or to remove any kind of difficulty in implementation of the law. But without keeping in mind the fetters that to what extent the Section 86 could be used to bring out the retrospectivity through an executive order only, the period of commencement has been brought out with effect from 1st July 2015. And the background which I could decipher or I could think of behind this kind of stunt was that earlier it was thought that it will be applied from that period and from the returns which will be filed. And so that, I mean, from that assessment year, so that the any return filed in this financial year 15-16 will be covered, because it will be implemented from assessment year 2016-17. But as you remember, one declaration scheme, one compliance window was brought out, which was to begin in September 2015 and which ended on December 2015. So that declaration of asset probably was not constitutionally possible in absence of this legislation being in force. And that is why to avoid any such situation that all the declarations should not become useless, that is why probably in this hushed up manner or jiffy manner, this amendment was brought out through an executive order, which I believe is subject to a challenge, which has been challenged, though it has been upheld, but still some questions are still left. So it has been, the commencement has been made with effect from 1st July 2015, and the sole purpose was to make this declaration scheme constitutionally valid, legally possible. Now, after introduction of this law, the Central Board of Direct Taxes issued, rules which are called Black Money Undisclosed Income, Foreign Assets and Imposition of Tax Rules 2015, that we also called as BMR. So in short, we will call the Act as BMA and rules as BMR. And there were many notifications issued so far in this regard. Many circulars have come. So first notification was notification number 58 dated 2nd July 2015, and also prescribed the manner of determination of fair market value and some illustrations that how this all these things can be computed. Then, sir, the purpose, as we can imagine very well, the whole objective of this law is to detect undisclosed foreign assets and income earned from the disclosed foreign sources. This is a stated object in the legislation by all persons resident in India. So there is one catch here, resident in India. The whole emphasis was by the residents in India, but there has been some change in that also. We will discuss about that. Then taxing such income and any such income which is embedded in the assets located outside India, and then penalizing such person and prosecute such offenders. So these are the threefold objectives which have been put before us in this legislation. Then first of all, the enforcement agency, that should be our first job, to know who is ultimately going to be the enforcement agency. For example, under income tax law, we know income tax department is the enforcement agency. When they created Benami law, so PPUs were carved out of investigation wing called as Benami Prohibition Unit. When enforcement directorate, when PMLA law was created in 2002, made effective from 2005, then this charge was given to FERA authorities, which were enforcement directorate, who were doing the function of FERA and FEMA. So the charge of enforcement was given to enforcement directorate. But when this Black Money Act has been created, because it has got most of the traces of income tax law, so its implementation, execution and enforcement has also been given to the income tax department. So for all purposes, you will see, since it is talking about the income tax authorities specified in section 116 of Income Tax Act shall be the tax authorities for the purpose of this act. So from this provision and many other provisions which I will put before you, the immediate feeling comes that as if the mother legislation is income tax legislation, that is Income Tax Act 1961, and this is a delegation. This is a baby carved out from the mother legislation, and which we may call as super specialized legislation, because that is a specific legislation. Income tax law is not a general legislation; it is also a specific legislation, but it becomes more specific, more specialized legislation. That is Benami, that is BMA. Pardon me if I again and again repeat Benami also in between, because now tomorrow I have to deliver my talk on Benami, so things are going hand in hand. So why I am emphasizing this fundamental concept of what is specific, what is more specific, because whenever the interpretational issues come, the fundamental rule of interpretation is any provision which is given in the specific law will have overriding effect or more prevailing effect upon the less specific act or general act. So let me proceed further from there. And as you know, declaration scheme was brought out on the platform whereby the government provided a one-time opportunity for a limited period to persons who had any foreign asset which had not been disclosed for the purpose of income tax. So if for income tax purposes it was not disclosed, income tax was evaded, then the scheme provided that such kind of assets could have been regularized, should have been made legal, legitimate by payment of 30% of tax, equivalent to 30%, and equivalent 100% amount of penalty equivalent to off tax. They meaning thereby total 60% of the payment, say 100 rupees value of asset is there, so as per the valuation rules. So then only 60 rupees was required to be paid, and the asset could have been said to be a declared asset. And then it also provided immunity not only from prosecution under income tax law or this law, plus also other notified enactments such as FEMA, Companies Act, etc. Then various circulars were issued with regard to various questions, issues which were arising under BMA, under declaration scheme. So these are the 3 circulars which are very prominent. So not only these circulars helped in understanding the nitty-gritties of scheme, but with the help of these circulars, there will be a great help in interpreting the various provisions of BMA, though the whole purpose was clarifying declaration scheme, but with the help of that, we can say circulars having persuasive value and circulars having binding effect if these are beneficial upon the assessees. So therefore, these circulars will be much more useful. So though this declaration scheme is of historical reference only, but I made a mention so that we could understand the evolution and background and also the concept of these circulars, on the basis of which we can take a help in understanding the complex issues involved in interpretation. So first of all, I was thinking that where to begin this law. Should I explain the definitions? Because every speaker has his own way of understanding. So, but I thought, let me first of all understand what is a liability upon us. So, I mean, what is going to happen now? What is new which has happened? So what is new? A legislation, particularly a fiscal legislation, is known through the charge section. What is a charge now? So the charge section is section 3. So I would like to begin from here, and then with trickling down with further questions as will be arising, I will be sharing all those thoughts with you. So according to my understanding, I will be beginning with, first of all, this charging section. And charging section simply says that an assessee, every assessee, now what do you mean by assessee? We will definitely understand, every meaning we will understand, will be liable for payment of tax at the rate of 30% for every assessment year, commencing on or after 1st day of April 2016. So one thing to be noted here very carefully, that though Act has been brought out with effect from 1st July 2015 because of the amendment which was brought out, but the assessment year is still 2016. So again, it gives an indication that the 1st July 2015 is for the purpose of making the declaration scheme workable, legal, constitutionally possible. So otherwise, the whole idea is that with effect from assessment year 2016-17, this, whatever the liability as is given in this charging section, will arise. So every assessee will be liable for the tax under this act at the rate of 30% from assessment year 2016 on what? On his total undisclosed foreign income and asset. And I can say it for proper clarity and understanding, it means total undisclosed foreign income and total and undisclosed foreign asset. So total of undisclosed foreign income and undisclosed foreign asset. So emphasis is on 2 things. Number 1, undisclosed, and number 2, foreign. Emphasis is on 2 things. So one thing has to be undisclosed, other thing has to be foreign. Now, the entire act revolves around these 2 things. And if other thing is there, that is important, is income and asset. So to what extent, what kind of income can be brought to tax here and what kind of assets are liable to be included here? That is what our whole discussion in understanding the scope and operation of this law, except of course administration part of this, let us leave it aside. So otherwise the entire discussion is going to revolve around these 3 things. So that is what we will understand, all these things one by one. So his total undisclosed foreign income and asset of the previous year. This is the next important thing which is going to be of great use to us, of the previous year. So these 2 things must pertain to previous year. So this section is very clear, unless we go to some other section where this entire concept has been shaken off the assessee of the assessment year of the previous year. All this concept firstly clarified. Firstly, these were restricted here, defined, but suddenly changed in subsequent provisos, subsequent sections, etc., etc. All those things we will study. So then proviso is added. Now this proviso is creating now, first of all, the point of the base of tax is clarified here. The point of time of tax incidence is clarified here. So point of tax of incidence will be in the relevant assessment year, and the base will be total of these two things, that is undisclosed foreign income and asset. So we can call it as undisclosed undisclosed foreign asset, UFA and UFI, right? Undisclosed foreign income and undisclosed foreign asset. But suddenly both are attempted to be changed by way of this proviso. How? I mean that the base is also attempted to be changed, and the point of time of incidence of tax is also attempted to be changed by way of this proviso. How? When this proviso to section 3(1) says, provided that undisclosed asset located outside India shall be charged to tax on its value in the previous year in which such asset comes to notice of the assessing officer. Though it may look quite strange, but that is a law. So whenever the income tax law was drafted, whether it was 1922 Act, whether it was 1961 Act, huge number of safeguards were taken to ensure that the law is not misused. So safeguards were in terms of time, in terms of jurisdiction, scope, approval, sanction, double check, etc., etc. But most of those boundaries have been removed. So first, the boundaries are created under section 3, the main section, subsection 1, and then suddenly by way of this proviso, now the reading suggests that they are redefining both of the things. Firstly, the impression comes, first of all, the base itself is being to change. For example, the base is now provided that an undisclosed asset located outside India shall be charged to tax on its value in previous year. So first of all, the base is been defined. Otherwise, had this not been there, the value would have been, of course, the value when the asset was acquired, but the base is being redefined. Then in which, and also the point of incidence of tax, that is in which the previous year in which such asset come to the notice of the assessing officer. So here also which year? When it comes to the notice of the assessing officer. So by one stroke, both the things are going to be defined, though there may be many views. So one view is only it is defining the base. So tax base. The base means the value in the previous year. And other view is that it is defining also the point of time of tax incidence. That is the year in which the asset comes to the notice. So year of value of that year will be taken. So in this manner, the point of incidence of tax is also being created. Then, not only that, what do we mean by the word value? That is also given in subsection 2. The value of this undisclosed asset, which says that value of an undisclosed asset means the fair market value of an asset, including financial interest in an entity. Now, this financial interest is a matter of huge debate, which we will definitely discuss if possible today, otherwise in some other session. So let's understand first of all the fundamental issues. So value of undisclosed assets means the fair market value in asset determined in such manner as may be prescribed. Now this manner, etc., though these are given in every legislation, but here the way things have been defined is as if the legislation wanted that we will tax the things the way we think it appropriate. Whatever is rationality, whatever may be the equity, whatever may be the fairness, that may be things of the past, but whatever we think right, we will go that way. Whenever we read the rule and when we will read many provisos and other provisions, this will definitely, this kind of impression will definitely emerge. So friends, this is the very, very important section, that is charging section. Now, though the reading of this charging section will be incomplete if I do not read section 72 bracket C. That is, it has been brought out in chapter 6, which deals with the declaration scheme, that is the compliance window. So the first impression which we got when we read this was that as if it is connected with the provisions of declaration scheme only, or the things related to, so it is of historical reference only, but no. The way it has been enacted is affecting and reshaping, attempting to reshape the entire understanding of point of tax incidence. And it is delimiting the law from any limits of time. So they are making the way Benami Act has been made a timeless beauty. So quite often I say, somebody was asking, ki, sir, samay seema kya hai Benami Act mein, PBT mein? तो जब मैंने बताया कि समय सीमा ये है कि पुराना कहीं तक जा सकता है, then the person asked, okay sir, what is the future time limit? Okay, if I buy an asset today, then up to what extent that transaction of that asset which I bought today can be covered under Benami law? Then I find only one answer only, that whatever was said by Shri Krishna in Shrimad Bhagavad Gita, that time is eternal, समय अनंत है, ना इसका प्रारंभ है ना अंत है. So they made PPPT access timeless beauty by not providing any time limit. But here also they made it timeless beauty, because probably under PPPT Act they were probably scared of. They had some inhibitions कि यार अगर हम खुल के लिखेंगे कि इसकी कोई टाइम लिमिट नहीं है तो पता नहीं कहीं कोई अनकॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल ना हो जाए, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनलिटी चैलेंज ना हो जाए. But here they did not have any kind of such fear. They have mentioned, when we read section 72C, we will find that as if fearlessly this has been made as a timeless beauty internal. I will read, it is there in the next slide, but I will not turn to the slide. I will read what section 72C says, because this is lost in the jungle of this BMA Act provisions, and because it is given at the fag end of the Act, but specifically when we read, it shakes, really shakes the total concept which of any kind of finality of litigation we have understood as of now as a student of law so far. It says, 72 says, where any asset has been acquired or made prior to commencement of this act and no declaration in respect of such asset is made under this chapter. So far it is talking about declaration only. So we thought it is pertaining to declaration only, but let us read the second half. Then what will happen? Suppose the asset is not declared. So asset which was existing prior to 1/7/2015, and if it is not declared in declaration scheme, what will happen? Such assets shall be deemed to have been acquired or made in the year in which a notice under section 10 is issued by the assessing officer, and the provisions of this act shall apply accordingly. So meaning thereby the attempt has been made that if any such asset continues to exist and it comes to the notice of the assessing officer under PB in this BMA, then whenever the notice is issued, so first charging section says that the year of acquisition will be the value, it will be taxability will be in the year in which it comes to the notice of the assessing officer. Now in this it says it will be deemed to have been acquired in the year in which notice is issued. So firstly it is contradicting it, make it redundant even the proviso, and then it is redefining the new dimension absolutely with respect to time, that whenever the officer will feel like issuing the notice, it will be deemed that it has been acquired in that very year only, and all the provisions will apply accordingly. So I mean, this is very strange kind of drafting, I would say, but be it as it may, let us proceed further for the time being. Now SSE. Now SSE, as we say, when I read that statement of objects also, and I read the definition also, and the impression which has been created so far, that also, and the whole the purpose, the jurisdiction of the act also is that suppose a resident assessee, if earns any money abroad or keeps his assets located outside India, then it is the purpose is to tax such kind of persons, the resident assessees. And initially that was the definition which we will when we'll read the pre-amended definition, which I have given in red color. Why I am giving red color is because just be aware that this is of no more of any use. So that is why it is in red. And the amendment was made in 2019. But let's read the pre-amended definition. It says assessee means a person being a resident other than not only resident. So it should be a resident, even not RNOR or even NR. So it is clearly speaking any person who is a resident and by whom tax in respect of undisclosed foreign income and asset or any other sum of money is payable under this act, and includes every person who is deemed to be an assessee in default under this act. So earlier the way situation was arising was that circular kind of situation was arising. So charging section says any person who is liable to pay tax under this act, any assessee who is liable to pay tax under this act. And the word of assessee is there means a person by whom tax in respect of undisclosed foreign income assets is payable. So it was creating a kind of circular situation. But to break all those things, now suddenly a different kind of dimension has been brought out, and the entire section has been, this definition has been changed by Finance Act 2019 by retrospectively amending the definition. So here also, whether the law could have been brought out retrospectively within the constitutional framework, that is also a question to be answered. Because when the legislation was brought out, it was brought out with a purpose to give effect or to bring into its purview the residents who are currently the residents. But whether this whole concept can be changed, and even if it can be changed, whether the substantive law itself can be changed with retrospective itself, it is a question itself, which of course it's still in the framework of time only. So time will tell how it will be going to be answered by the courts. But till that time, we can have our own guesses only. So the redefined definition, which has been retrospectively brought out, says that assessee means, first of all, a resident. So resident will of course be an assessee, and it also includes non-resident in this manner. Being a non-resident or NOR within the meaning of section 6 of section 66. So one thing more is very important, friend, here. As I said, this is a legislation which is taking colors and shades from income tax law, Income Tax Act. So therefore, the definition of the resident also is taking shape from the definition of resident as has been provided under the Income Tax Act. Now, many questions would be arising here. So once we read the definition of section 66 as per the definition which has been given under the income tax law, can we also take support from the definition which is sometimes given in the DTA? So whether section 90 is also to be invoked. So whether the definition of the resident is in turn to be ascertained as per section 66 read with section 90, that is meaning thereby sometimes the definitions given in DTA happens to be different, particularly when the dual residency takes place. Then we have the concept of tiebreaker rule, for example, particularly when the residential status is determined under poem, etc., or many other circumstances. So then the help is taken from the relevant articles of DTA if the countries have the contracting state and the other state have articles entered into DT, entered into, then that is also helpful. So whether that can be also taken, that is another answer, another question which we need to answer. So instantly speaking, I would say yes, the harmonious construction of all the provisions when we read together will be that yes, harmonious reading of both the laws will be that when we read the definition under section 66, it has to be supported with section 90, especially because of the fact that section 84 of this BMA especially make reference that the provisions of many other sections will be applicable here also, and that many sections include section 90 also. So meaning thereby, for the timing, I can say the residential status as given in section 66 read with applicable DTA, if any, in the previous year. That Income Tax Act, so section 66 in the previous year. So he can be non-resident in the previous year. Who was, so in this previous year, the relevant previous year, when the act is being invoked, he can be non-resident who was resident in India, either in the previous year to which income referred to in section 4 relates, or in the previous year in which the undisclosed asset located outside India was acquired. So suppose a person who had earlier acquired the asset, when he acquired the asset, he was resident, or when he earned the income from the sources located outside India, he was non-resident at that time. But suppose he was, he was resident at that time when he did any of these two things, but now he has become non-resident, which because of the unamended definition was not possible to be included, but this definition says that such kind of assessee would also be included here. Then or in the previous year in which undisclosed asset locations outside India was acquired. Now, as I said, section 72C is going to recreate the new dimensions, the new concepts. So here it was coming as a hindrance. So there they say, no, we will see the residential status without taking into account 72C. Because if we take 72C into consideration, then it will create a very awkward situation and the person will again become out of the clutches. Because 72C will say that the asset will be deemed to be acquired in the year in which notice is issued. So if the notice is issued, he is non-resident. So again, the problem will come. So again they will be back to square one. So then they say no. For the time being, you exclude 72C from here, but otherwise 72C will remain in picture. So rationalization of this BMA of this amendment, which was made, I can skip it as I have discussed already about this, that why this amendment was brought out. Then they have also brought out that some clarificatory amendment in section 10, which deals with the assessment, because so far the word used was assessment only. And now they say assessment will also include reassessment. Now, I do not understand why they are so conscious about this use of the word reassessment, because here under BMA Act, there is no concept of reassessment, because since it has become a timeless duty. So since it is without boundary of time, so there is no need to make reassessment. At any time, he can assess. So because under Income Tax Act, if the income of a particular year has escaped, suppose when the assessment was being done, or when there was a time limit for making assessment under section 143(1) or 143(3) in whatever manner, then the permission has been given. The law provides this facility to the income tax assessing officer that he can make reassessment of that year. So reassessment word means reassessment of income of that year. So suppose income has been assessed at ₹100 of a particular year, but later on, if it comes to the notice of assessing officer, no, some more income was there, so he can reassess that income of ₹100 and take it to 110, 150, 200, whatever. So by including the income which is now comes to the notice of the assessing officer, meaning thereby which was earlier escaped from assessment. But here, since there is no concept of time limit, so anything which comes to the notice can be deemed to be the asset of that year, can be assessed in that year. So therefore, there is no substantial concept of clear concept of reassessment. But anyways, for some purpose, this reassessment word has been used. Maybe for the reason that suppose in subsequent year also, whenever the notice is issued, suppose an income or an asset has been assessed, particularly at say value, say bank account has been say assessed at say ₹1 crore rupees, equivalent value I am saying of the amount held in bank account. But again, perusing the bank account again, suppose it comes to the notice of the assessing officer in same bank account, the computation has been made wrongly, which is outside the purview of the rectification provisions, then maybe the reassessment of the same has been allowed, and that too without any time limit. Then the next component, as I mentioned there, which was used in the charging section, first was SSE, then the previous year, and then the liability on the base and the point of tax incidence, and then was the base amount was the aggregate amount of undisclosed asset and undisclosed foreign income from the sources outside India. So let us understand one by one. Undisclosed asset located outside India has been defined, but undisclosed foreign income has not been defined, which has been indirectly defined in section 4. That also we'll read. So firstly, it has been clearly defined under section 202(11) that what do we mean by undisclosed asset located outside India. And I will read the section as it is, because it is again also subject to many ifs and buts. So section 2(11) says undisclosed asset located outside India means any asset, including financial interest in any entity, located outside India, held by SSE in his name or in respect of which he is beneficial owner, and he has no explanation about the source of investment in such asset, or the explanation given by him is, in the opinion of the assessing officer, unsatisfactory. Now, many questions arise suddenly here, and we have to find answers of all these possible questions. Of course, the most vague question will be with regard to financial interest, but other than that also, what do we mean by location of asset? Because there could be different kind of asset. The word asset has not been defined here, but different assets could be there. Like as far as immovable properties are concerned, these are clearly could be understand. Movable assets, there could be a problem, but still movable asset means it may be jewelry, it may be bank account, it may be other things. So those also, I mean, you can think it jewelry is found in the locker, etc. Bank account is registered and located outside India. But there could be certain assets which are really very difficult to decide where these are located. For example, shares. For example, units of mutual fund. For example, shares, unit of mutual fund, and for example, IPRs. So with respect to that, since it has not been defined here or provided specifically that how the location will be decided, so we'll have to go by, we'll have to understand this from other allied laws wherever these have been defined. It could be Companies Act, it could be SEBI law, it could be legislation with regard to Copyright Act, Securities Act, etc. Wherever, whatever allied legislations could be there. And even if they are not found there, then whatever understanding in the journal context a person can make, that will be used here. So let me understand first thing first. So firstly, sir, as far as shares are concerned, we can read the judgment of Vodafone by Honorable Supreme Court, latest piece of law on which we can bank upon, and that judgment clearly says that wherever the asset is located would mean wherever the asset can be got transferred. So if it is Indian company, the shares will be transferred in India only. So like that. And similarly, units of mutual fund, again, same rule can be applied there. IPR. Now, with regard to IPR, different legislation, different countries uses the term in their different manner. So since we are talking about BMA in India, so what Indian law says, IPR is deemed to be located, wherever it is used. So if it is used in India, then it will be deemed to be located in India. Whereas law probably in USA says that corresponding law in USA, says that wherever the IPR is registered, wherever the copyright, trademark, patent is registered, then it can be deemed to be located there. So this is also a big question which will have to be answered. But let us, for the time being, proceed further. So undisclosed asset located outside India means an asset located outside India held by the SSE in his name or in respect of which he is a beneficial owner. So as far as his name is concerned, we are all clear. Suppose the registered his name. Now, what do we mean by the word beneficial owner? And whether it is same as beneficiary. So if a person is beneficiary of asset or a person is beneficial owner of asset, is it the same thing? No, sir, no. There are absolutely different meaning. Now, the term beneficial owner has also been defined under various laws in different manner, altogether different manner. We can take the definition from PMLA. We can take the definition from PBPT Act. We can also take the definition of income tax law. Yes, income tax law has also defined it. So from where we should take? In that case, we should take from Income Tax Act only for two reasons. Number one, section 2(15) of BMA specifically says whatever is not defined here is to be, the meaning is to be borrowed from the definition, corresponding definition under Income Tax Act. So if no corresponding definition is given under Income Tax Act also, only then we have to see the next clause legislation with regard to it, as I told a few minutes back. So therefore, firstly, we have to peep into income tax law. So with regard to beneficial owner, friends, yes, the definition has been given. And the second reason is because ultimately disclosure, non-disclosure of income shall be based, which I am going to discuss very shortly with you, on the basis of disclosure made in the income tax return under section 139 of income tax return. So again, if the disclosure norms are to be deciphered from there, so ultimately then we have to see pick up the definition of this beneficial owner concept also there from, if it is given there. Yes, if you read section 139 subsection 1, it's subsection 4, it's explanation 4 and 5. They define this concept of beneficial owner and beneficiary both. So very important distinction which has been marked out and which is really going to be very handy in understanding the distinction is, for being a beneficial owner, a person should not only be beneficiary, meaning thereby current or future or direct or indirect in any manner, but should have also paid the consideration for that asset. So two conditions have to be fulfilled. He should stand to gain, A, and B, he should have paid the consideration. And that is precisely the definition given under PBPT Act also. So there is parity as far as that is concerned. Whereas the beneficiary concept is totally different. Beneficiary concept says if the person will stand to gain from the particular asset. That asset could be asset, tangible asset. Asset could that benefit maybe from like a financial interest. For example, he being beneficiary of a trust in a trust. So asset held in a trust. So that is the one thing that he need not pay any consideration. He can be simply beneficiary. Number one. Number two, he should be beneficiary during the year itself. So meaning thereby the benefit must accrue to him during the year itself. But here the word used is beneficial owner. So meaning thereby, for the purpose of invoking section 202 bracket 11, that person has to be beneficial owner and not mere beneficiary. Now we proceed further. And has no explanation about the source of investment in such asset, or the explanation given by him is, in the opinion of the assessing officer, unsatisfactory. Now these three lines, I mean, seems to be very simple, but our experience says that the entire controversy under income tax law is revolving around those provisions where such kind of language has been used. And even Supreme Court had to say in open court in one hearing when it was going on, they had to observe orally in the courtroom. And I hope some of you must have also heard about it. Then SSC was, working hard to explain in the courtroom, the counsel of that SSC, to that how they have brought out evidences to substantiate that particular claim which he was making. He had made down below with the assessing officer, which assessing officer rejected, that you are not substantiated well. So ultimately, Supreme Court had to say, when a lot of controversy from both the sides was going on, why don't you go back and why don't you simply satisfy the officer on this? Because ultimately his satisfaction is supreme. Maybe Supreme Court, but his satisfaction is supreme here. Nobody says the satisfaction of any higher court. Everybody talks about the satisfaction of the assessing officer. So you can pick up the definition given in section 68, 69, etc., 69 ABC. So wherever these words have been used, and particularly when the words have been left open-ended. Now satisfaction means what? So what are the parameters of this satisfaction? When he will be satisfied? When he will simply say, ki I have acquired this asset from the income which I earned 10 years back, or he has to also satisfy that on that income the taxes have been paid. Number one. So meaning thereby the first question which is arising is whether the satisfaction will be only when it is satisfied that the income infused in this asset is tax paid income only, or he has to simply explain about the source. Okay, I had salary income from outside, from there I have earned it, or he has to also show that taxes have been paid as applicable and in India on this. Number one. Number two, it is also not clarifying that suppose an SSC becomes successful about telling the source which are nothing to do with its income or taxability thereof, but the sources are other than the income, which could be capital receipts of many times, which could be loan, which could be gift, which could be by way of inheritance, etc., etc. So what are the parameters on the basis of which the explanation? If SSC gives no explanation, of course the question of being satisfying not arise. So he is going to be unsatisfied only. So but if he gives an explanation like this, what are the parameters when it can be said to be satisfied? That is also a question. But for the time being, let us presume that he does not give an explanation which is satisfactory. Or suppose it is clear case of tax evaded property located outside India. So that kind of asset is covered here. Undisclosed foreign income and asset. Now, as I said, undisclosed foreign income has not been defined, but their aggregate has been defined. Now, what do we mean by the aggregate? Aggregate of the both. And how it has been defined? Section 2 bracket 12 defines it. And what does it say? It says that undisclosed foreign income and asset means the total amount of undisclosed income of an SSE from a source located outside India and the value of undisclosed asset located outside India referred to in section 4 and computed in the manner laid down in section 5. Now here so two things are very important. In fact, charging section 3, and then this is section 212. So everything comes involved here. In fact, everything else is unfolding these two sections. So therefore, I will read this section 2 bracket 12 again for the sake of better clarity, that undisclosed foreign income and asset means the total amount of two things. Number one, undisclosed income of an assessee from a source located outside India. All right. And the value of undisclosed asset located outside India. So undisclosed income and value of an asset located outside India. Two things as referred to in section 4 and computed in the manner laid down in section 5. So let us understand how. So in a way, charging section is section 3, which is further supported with section 212 and 211. And then the computational provisions are given in section, the mechanism is given in section 4 and the computational provision is given in section 5. So now let us understand the mechanism also, how they are going to, arrive at all these things. So section 4 says that scope of total undisclosed foreign income and asset would be aggregate of the following 3 amounts. So though these are 2 amounts only, but the first amount has been bifurcated into 2 parts, which are same thing, but said in a different manner to cover up 2 situations, similarly 2 situations. So first amount is income. Firstly, item number A and B talks about income and item C talks about asset located outside India. Now, income from a source located outside India, not disclosed in the return of income furnished within the time specified in explanation 2 to subsection 1 or 4 or 5 of section 139 of the Income Tax Act. Now, there is a background to it. If you'll recapitulate kindly, Finance Act 2012 had brought out provisions in this regard, when FA schedule was also brought on the statute by way of rules that in the income tax return, FA schedule is to be enclosed. And also this requirement was given that every assessee here in India who is not liable to file return in the above, other than this subsection which was there meant for this subsection 4, whosoever is not liable to file return in above cases, but if he has income from sources outside India, shall be liable to file return here. So that section was there, and which has been then amended subsequently. And now after the amendment, now this that same thing has been referred here, that wherever an assessee is required to furnish return because of that explanation, because of that section, that is section 139, subsection 1, and is subsection 4 and 5, and also required to disclose income therein from the assets located in. If any income is not disclosed therein, which it was required to disclose, so meaning thereby if assessee should have income which is required to be disclosed in the return and which is not disclosed. So that is number 1. That is straight away covered here. Number 2, if no return is filed, then also this income. So if a return is filed, but it is not disclosed, so he's filing the return, but it's not disclosing the income from foreign, or he does not file the return itself. So the real effect is same. So meaning thereby in the return or in no return, income which he was duty bound to disclose, statutorily obliged under the provisions of Income Tax Act, which he earns from outside India, on which he is duty bound to pay income tax, does not disclose, then that will be treated as undisclosed income, will be liable to be included here as part of under the scope of total undisclosed foreign income and asset. Number 1. Now number 2, undisclosed asset. Before coming to the asset, few important issues which are arising here. Now firstly, you may say that sir, a situation may arise that we could not disclose the such kind of income in the return filed under section 139(1). But suppose we filed this particular in the return which is filed, say, in pursuance to return filed in pursuance to notice under section 148, or return filed in pursuance to notice under section 153A or 153C, etc. Because for many practical purposes, it has been held by the courts that it will be deemed to be return filed under section 139(1). But whether the same benefit can be extended here? This is the first question which is arising. Actually, the answer to this first question is no. For simple reason, if you see, rather two reasons. First of all, that deeming is for specific purpose. That deeming, whenever it is made, it is for the purpose for which it is being made. The deeming, the basic fundamental rule of interpretation is deeming does not extend boundaryless for all the purposes which were even not envisaged at the time when deeming was made. So that is the first reason. So deeming made for a specific purpose, it cannot extend here. Number two, this is a specific law. A specific law will not be hit by any deeming provision. So if it is specifically creating a force of law in this manner, then the law will prevail in this manner only. Now, last but not least, there is a time limit which is provided here. You can see that the income from a source located outside India not disclosed in the return of income furnished within the time specified in expression 2. So even if it is filed in 148, but that is furnished beyond time. So if it is furnished beyond time, the requisite mandatory condition of this is not fulfilled. So matter is over. Number one. Second, sir, now let us try to understand what is the third component. The value of any asset, any undisclosed asset located outside India. So as I said, that there are going to be multiple issues with regard to the location of asset, but neither the definition is given in income tax law or DMA. So we will have to develop on the most proximate legislation, allied law in this regard, and accordingly location will be decided. And with regard to valuation, comprehensive rules have been given, and the things have been defined how valuation will be done, though the rules may not be fair, rules may be inequitable, but whatever the rules are, because what is happening is because of the rules, since an asset which was acquired, say rupees $100,000, now its value say $500,000. So why it should be assessed at, because they are adopting the current valuation. So in fact, this law has, I would say, disassociated itself with the concept of real income theory. So real income principle, which right from one ITR, we as a student of income tax law have been studying. Dear friends, with heavy heart, I am saying, please get over it and forget about that. Now, whatever legislature thinks should be assessed, legislature does that. Whatever manner legislature wants to tax you, legislature can. And the courts are also supporting it for the obvious reasons that there had been many leakages, many dents in the economy, which is attacking not only financial system of our country, but also attacking the financial sovereignty of our country in certain situations. And if you could kindly recall, this entire, rigmarole started, if I remember, though it was starting even much earlier, but it gained momentum in 2011, when in the case of Hassan Ali, Honorable Supreme Court lambasted upon the dispensation, the then dispensation, that why don't you do something with regard to black money which is stashed abroad? And that is how, when the general feeling is that people are doing wrong in large and doing, very unfair things with the country, then when this kind of feeling becomes quite strong, so very strict laws are made. And not only strict laws are made, the judiciary also, when this kind of feeling reaches a judiciary also reaches above all the possible fetters which may have been followed by that time, rises above that and upholds the constitutionality of all such provisions. So in simple words, I would say, earlier the things were decided on the basis of form and paperwork, but now the things will be decided by the courts, the appellate courts, mostly on the basis of substance and facts. So just keep this thing in mind. So now there are some specific exclusions from the definition of undisclosed income as per section 4.2. So these exclusions are only with regard to income. So as I read a few minutes back, that any income which is omitted to be disclosed here, that kind of income will become undisclosed income. But since, as I said, that this is going to create, very vague situation, and many unthinkable situation can be covered here, because there could be many reasons for non-disclosure, etc., etc. So taking care of that, this one exception has been carved out by inserting few provisions in section 4.2, which says that any variation made in the assessment reassessment under income tax in accordance with the following provisions of Income Tax Act. So meaning thereby, if this thing happens, any addition to income tax under income tax law takes place, that will not be uh, taken as undisclosed income for the purpose of section 4.1. Right, friends? So what are those specific mentioning? Suppose a person has disclosed his foreign income from a business located outside India, and while computing the business income, the assessing officer makes some variation, disallows certain expenses which he had claimed under section 29 to 43C, or while assessing his income under income from other sources, some variations are made because of under section 57 to 59, or some transfer pricing adjustments are made under section 92C. So any such kind of additions by the assessing officers will not tantamount to non-disclosure, as has been envisaged under section 4.1, which I have again reopened for you. So this is a welcome measure. This will really remove the possible hardships which could have arisen. But they wanted to give the benefit, but I do not know how they fell short of it without completing it. Now, this kind of situation can arise with regard to other heads of income also. Now, for example, income under the head salaries, income from house property. So suppose a person has income from house property, how the income is to be computed? Because the income tax provisions with regard to income from house properties also vary country to country. And here also very vague, because the deemed income concept is there. Because suppose evaluation has been done under section 23 on the basis of actual rent or part year rent received in the part of the year, but variations are made, some other values adopted, some disallowance is made. So what will happen about that? Why there is no specific mention about that? Similarly, suppose income is offered under the head capital gain. Now the assessing officer says, no, this sales consideration which you have adopted is incorrect, or the cost of acquisition is incorrect. So I will increase the sales consideration, or I will reduce the cost of acquisition, or say some other reduction which I have claimed that is not allowed. So whether any addition is made, whether that will also be excluded like this or what? Similarly, with regard to salary, there could be issues of ESOP, etc. There could be other issues which become taxable here, and assessing officer makes their revision. So what will happen about that? So friends, this is very, very strange kind of position. But to my mind, if you ask my personal opinion, they will get the same treatment which are given to these three. Because the whole emphasis is on the part of non-disclosure. Now, for example, let us come to the whole concept. The whole fundamental thing is that income which is not disclosed. Now, once the disclosure takes place, the jurisdiction of the BMA is ousted. The jurisdiction of BMA should be there because it is a specific law. Specific law has a force, ample force than over the general law. But the restriction, the limitation of specific law has, which the specific law has, is that it has got certain boundaries. So it cannot travel beyond the boundaries at all. It has to be strictly interpreted. So once any disclosure has been made under the income tax return, that would be within the exclusive domain of assessing officer only. I should add the word assessing officer under the income tax law only, not with the assessing officer under BMA. That is my personal opinion, and it is not supported apparently with any judgment. So let's see, whenever the courts will give us opportunity, then with their good wishes, maybe we are able to argue before the court and create the law in the rightest possible manner. Then, sir, whether the other incidental question which arises here is, what will happen with regard to the disallowance of expenditure if it is disallowed on the ground that it is bogus? Whether the assessee gets the license to claim any bogus expenditure, and thereby reduces foreign income. Now, answer to this, you may not agree with me, but answer to this, in fact, yes. Though I should not use this word license, but the way I would use is the jurisdiction of only income tax law states there. Because he is making some claims. The claims may be correct, the claims may not be correct, but he is making certain claims. So that claim, if it is rejected, it is Income Tax Act to take care of that. But hold on. It does not mean that you suppress your income totally. Do not even independent sources do not create here. Suppose a person is showing income from his business, say of $100 million, say located in London in one bank account, say $100 million. And on the basis of that bank account, he reports his income here. But he has got another bank account, which he is carrying in the same name of business. And that account he does not disclose here at all. And when the assessing officer finds that bank account, what should he do? If he, now I will take both situations. Whose right is there? My first question is whose right is there? The assessing officer under income tax law gets to know about the other bank account. And then in that scenario, whether he has to make addition under the Income Tax Act that look, apart from this $100 million, you had another bank account in which $1 million was deposited, which against which there is no expenses available. It is purely your income. So there are two options available. Number two situations which are possible. So one situation is that the assessing officer under income tax law makes addition of that $1 million under the Income Tax Act and enhances his income accordingly. Other is option that income tax officer does not do anything. It is the BMA officer which issues in the notice that this is your undisclosed bank account. What is your opinion? What should happen? Today, we have the privilege of going live, and I can address many of my brothers and sisters without even moving out of my home and without having any limitation of space and time. But the limitation is that I cannot connect with you. I may have the internet, but not the interconnect. So I cannot ask the poses which in the physical seminar I used to have. What is your guesses on that? What is the right course available? And accordingly, the course available to the assessees concerned will arise. According to my considered understanding, the assessing officer under income tax law does not have any jurisdiction here, because the disclosure itself has been shaken, because that bank account was not disclosed at all. If that bank account would have been the part of the books of account and still there was some separation, it is the job of the domain of the assessing officer under income tax law, not BMA officer. Okay, I will use the word income tax officer and BMA officer. So it was exclusive domain of assessing income tax officer, but not BMA. But since it is not disclosed at all, it becomes the exclusive domain of BMA officer. So under those circumstances, even if the disclosure has been made of the income of that business, but since that bank account is totally undisclosed, it will be under the BMA officer. Now, suppose by mistake, income tax officer has made addition of that. Whether BMA officer has jurisdiction of that? That is a very big question. The one view available to that is that even if an officer has done something illegal, that could not prevent the legal authority to do legal action. So meaning thereby the concept of estoppel will not arise here. Principle of estoppel will not arise here, and that cannot prevent the BMA officer to make addition of that on parallel basis. But I would say, I think some equity and sense would prevail. Some ways and mechanism would be found out that it should be rectified here under the Income Tax Act. And after the rectification, only BMA officer can make addition of that. And if vice versa takes place, so suppose BMA officer has already assessed it, then income tax officer, of course, has no jurisdiction. So that is how I have got some kind of reconciliation which different situations will take place. Now, two more heads which came to my mind is income assessed under section 93 with respect to transfer of income to non-resident, and 94A on special measures in respect to transaction with persons located in notified jurisdiction area. So these are the complex things, but again, the fundamental concept should revolve around disclosure and non-disclosure. Disclosure with full grace, full sincerity, I think the law will help. if there is some kind of aberration, smartness, crookedness, then law may not help us. So always remember the theory of substance and facts over form and paper. Now, one thing more which is important to note here, section 4.3. It says the income included in total undisclosed foreign income and asset under BMA shall not form part of total income under the Income Tax Act. So as I said, the moment BMA officer checks in, the jurisdiction of everybody else is out. Like in America, the rule is if FBI comes, everybody else is out. So here also if CBI comes, the economic office wing is out. So now in that context, if BMA checks in, everybody else is out. The total income included in the total undisclosed income. But the problem is, sir, the problem is it has not been clarified under income tax law. Wherever there was any small hiccup in bringing in force this law, they immediately came out with provisions like 72C, etc. But what about if income tax officer becomes misadventurous and says, no, I will assess? Where is the denial? Income tax law, I am bound by my master, my Bible, my Gita is income tax law, sir. So Taneja, sir, I will assess. You can keep fighting. That is your role, but I will assess. What will you do? Though at appellate forum, somebody will help us, but why to leave such kind of situation? So I think here such kind of suitable amendment should be made under income tax law, and this clarity should be with regard to the domain, respective domains of different officers should be brought out in black and white. Computation of total undisclosed foreign income and asset. Now let us come to the computation provision. So section, first of all, charging, then mechanism was there that how will you aggregate, what all you will include. I mean, the charging and section 3 and 4 are perimeteria, not perimeteria, complementary to each other. So both put together, in fact, section 3 supported with section 212 and 211 and the section 4. They create the base, in fact. Now from the base, they say, now how do you finally arrive at the income? So that is a computation provision. It says that subsection 5 says, in computing the total undisclosed foreign income and asset of any previous year of an SSC, no deduction in respect of any expenditure or allowance or set off of any loss shall be allowed to the SSC, whether or not it is allowable in accordance with the provisions of Income Tax Act. Now, firstly, you may be thinking about this. Ki, sir, what does it mean when we take this undisclosed income of, say, any business? So whether it means that we will take gross receipts, that sale proceeds, or we will take only whatever expenses are mentioned there. So net income means income. Here my answer is, though it is little vaguely worded, but it is clear from the reading of the law, they are using the word income. Though again, misadventurous officers may do anything, but it will be beyond any imaginations, in fact. So in fact, what I understand is one has to compute the income. And once you compute the income, you have to take the net receipts only, meaning thereby the gross receipts, the gross proceeds, and the outflow. Now, then what was the need to, if you are taking income, what do you mean by the no deduction in respect of expenditure or allowance or set off of any loss shall be allowed to the SSC, whether or not it is allowable in accordance with provisions of Income Tax Act? I think they have been very, very cautious. In fact, it is a case of extra precaution which they are taking, that if any over adventurous SSC makes any claim which is not possible, for example, and though any expenditure, any loss could be there which has incurred in any other business there abroad, so they say no. Now, for example, when we talk about additions made under section 68, because that is also now on standalone basis, that is also a law within the income tax law. Another law has been created when 115 BBE has been created, that additions made under section 68, etc., will be taxed on a standalone basis at the rate of 68 or 60% or 78%, whatever. So there also they say no kharcha will be given. So I was, imagining there also what kind of kharcha they mean. I mean, when the income is there, so income means only addition under section 68. So what kind of kharcha one can expect? So I could not fathom, only to the extent, except to the extent that if somebody says, I had created undisclosed income, and to create that I had paid entry commission to the commission operator, etc. But that is also not logical, but that is not to earn that in income. Income is earned otherwise. So maybe they, to prevent any such kind of claim, they have clarified. So wherever there are any possible actions which is not good or equitable may arise on the hands of the assessing, at the end of the assessees, they have already preempted it. But similar thing should be done on the other side also. Any wrong action which is possible on the part of the officers, that also should be preempted. No, there is some lacking to it, and that is not fair in a civilized economy like this and the kind of constitution we have. Not fair. Anyways, let's proceed ahead. Then it says, second thing it excludes is any income which has been assessed to tax for any assessment year under Income Tax Act prior to assessment year to which this act applies. So once we have added this foreign income and asset, then they are saying these things will be reduced. So they are saying any income which has been assessed under the Income Tax Act. But hold on, not any time. No. So it is not saying that suppose today any this section 4 makes aggregate of some amount is computed as per section 3 and 4. Then if the corresponding undisclosed income has already been undisclosed income which has been used in creating that asset, suppose that has been assessed under Income Tax Act also, then it will be reduced. No, they're not saying this. They say prior to assessment year to which this act applies. So meaning thereby, suppose the asset is being assessed today, but its income was earned earlier, which has been assessed. So suppose the asset's value today is 10 crores as per the valuation norms, because of the notional value which they are very surprisingly, shockingly they are taking. And suppose it's because asset was created, say at rupees 1 crore initial period, and that has been assessed on which tax has been paid. So they say if you are not disclosing the asset of 10 crore, we will reduce that rupees 1 crore today. Prior to, if it was assessed prior to coming into force this act, meaning thereby prior to 1/4/2016, prior to assessment year 2016. So up to and including assessment year 15-16, if any amount has been included in assessment, that will only be reduced. So though thankfully good provision, but very shockingly the next question arises is what will happen subsequently? If subsequently this happens, to this, sir, my answer is that there is no need to be shocked to that extent, because the scheme of the act is like that, which will be clear when we read clause B. And clause B says, which will further be reduced is, which is assessable or has been assessed. So let me read, let me make a complete reading. Any income which is accessible or has been assessed to tax for any assessment year under this act, right? So anything which is accessible or assessed under this act shall be, can you just give me 1 second? Okay, it's not, I just wanted to make small correction, but it is not allowing me to make correction. Yes. So which is accessible or has been assessed to tax for any assessment year under this act. So any income which is assessed under BMA. So if the asset has been acquired from that income, the nexus will have to be proved by the assessee by doing the impossible task of satisfying an unsatisfied officer. Yes, I'm conscious of the expressions which I'm using. So the officers are always unsatisfied for many reasons. And I'm saying so on the basis of statistics available, on the basis of the experience of many people like us. So you have to satisfy that we have used this income in acquiring this asset and which has been already assessed under BMA, then that will be reduced, right? So it's the, as I said, the domain of both the legislation is different. From assessment year 16-17 onwards, the undisclosed income will be assessed under BMA only, not under income tax law. Since it is not going to be assessed under income tax law, there was no necessity of reducing it from here because it is not expected and permitted to be assessed there. So now this gives me the second reason to say that wrongly assessed income under income tax law post 2016-17 will have to be reduced by the income tax officer in its return if the undisclosed income of foreign has been assessed by him, because it is to be exclusive domain is to be assessed by BMA officer and it will have to be reduced here. So these words are different. Shall be reduced from the value, this is second para, shall be reduced from the value of the undisclosed asset located outside India if the assessee furnishes evidences to the satisfaction of the assessing officer that asset has been acquired from the income which has been assessed or is accessible as the case may be. So this word accessible is very important. So now next question arises. Suppose in 2017-18, I earn an income and I acquire an asset. Suppose 10 lakh, $1 million was the income. And for 1.5 million, I acquired asset. Remaining 0.5 million was from disclosed sources, taxpayer sources, and 1 million was from undisclosed sources. Now in 2021, assessment date 2021, this asset is located, noticed by the assessing officer, and he issues me the notice. So this $1 million, the BMA officer is not able to assess, forgets to assess. And now he cannot, because only asset can be assessed, not this. Asset can be subsequently assessed because whenever it comes to the notice, not income. Income has to be assessed in the same year only. So whether he will be able to reduce it, because the word used is accessible. Since the word used is assessed or accessible, I think the law will oblige to give such kind of benefit or deduction also. Though another question you may say, sir, he will assess the income also in that year because there is no time limit. So subject to the time limits, if any, he will assess there and then he will give reduction there. That we will study little later. Now one illustration has been appended, which talks about the reduction in the value of asset. Suppose an asset has been acquired in by using disclosed income and undisclosed income both. So since asset is the aggregate amount, say of rupees say 100, it has been acquired of undisclosed asset also. Since its value is going to be increased, so they say that we will proportionally increase the value of the disclosed portion. So in fact, an undisclosed portion's inflation benefit will go to the BMA officer only, meaning thereby the government will stand to gain, because they say the idea behind it will be, since you have enjoyed that undisclosed asset, so during this period, if you would have paid the tax, the government would have been also enriched because of the inflation benefit. Since you prevented the government from that benefit, so you must pay its tax on the current value. But it is rejecting the concept of real income. It is taxing on notional income on that, though it is not income, but it is assessing me. So to that extent, it is harsh. So friends, I have tried to make one chart that how this computation provisions will arise. So what is the mechanism which will be used? So there is going to be undisclosed foreign income and undisclosed foreign asset. So that is how this, with the help of this chart, you can understand that first of all, which I have already explained, the income will be computed and in which the deductions will be made, and then in foreign asset, what all can be reduced, which I have already explained. So we can skip this. Then in this manner, then finally computation will be made. That first of all, we will add computation income from sources located outside India, and then foreign income in respect of which no income tax return has been filed. Then fair market value of undisclosed foreign asset, shall be calculated, and then we will reduce the income from which has been assessed to tax for any assessment year. In fact, I have already explained it how it will be done, so I can skip this also. Then friends, penal provisions. So I will quickly cover the remaining slides. So though you can read from the act itself, what are the penalties? So basically penalties can be divided into 3 or 4 parts. First of all, penalty, in fact, on this amount only, that's have evaded tax. So the amount of tax which he will be computing on that, straight away 300% penalty is there. Sir, can you mute? Somebody has unmuted, which is creating some noise. So the first thing is that on 100 rupees, suppose 30 rupees the tax, that is 100 rupees total aggregate amount of undisclosed assets and foreign income, 100 rupees comes. So 30 rupees is this. Out of this 100 rupees, there may be some notional value also. So on this 30 rupees, the 300% tax, meaning thereby 90 rupees more. So 90 plus 30, 120. Against 100 rupees, we are paying 120. And not only that 120. I mean, that 100 also, it has got some inflation value because that value is going to be computed on notional basis. So it is much more. And sir, believe me, there is no compounding provision available. So whenever the prosecution will arise, that will also arise. So I'm not coming to that. So for the time being, let us stick to penalty. So then penalty for failure to return, that I do not file return, or if I do not furnish in the return the desired particulars. So it could be possible a situation that the taxation may not be possible as on date, but whether it's penalty will still be levied, then the answer is yes. Even if taxation is not possible, they say if you do not disclose, maybe you may not be liable because of the deductions and all those things, but you would be liable for penalty. Person who is doing it will be liable under section 42 and 43. Similarly, if a person defaults in payment of these taxes of 120% or this penalty, then also sum equal to amount of tax arrears. So then 30 plus 90, 120, and then he defaults, then 30 more. So again, it becomes 150. So meter is increasing and increasing. And then penalty for other defaults is also there. That suppose a person does not give proper answer, does not give statement, does not give record, then 50,000 to 2 lakh rupees. So now 2-3 questions immediately arise here. Ki whether levying of penalty is mandatory and whether amount is quantified or amount could be less or more. These are the two questions, very important questions. So how the section has been worded, it will depend upon that. Let me read one of the sections. Firstly, it says the assessing officer may direct that in a case where tax has been computed under section 10 in respect of undisclosed foreign income and asset, the assessee shall be by way of penalty in addition to tax, if any, payable by him, a sum equal to 3 times the tax computed under that section. So firstly, it is saying the assessing officer may direct. So had there been, the provisions would have been automatic. So as far as levy of penalty, if tax is computed, it is automatic that if this much is tax is there, it shall pay a sum equal to 303 times. So amount is fixed. If you say it is shall, it is preceding with the word shall. So if the penalty is levied to be levied, it has to be levied at the rate of 90%. That is 3 times. So that is mandatory. It is automatic to that extent. But the very levying of the penalty is automatic, consequential, or it is subject to certain discretion and judicious situation, judicial approach. To that, my answer is that the word used are assessing officer may direct. So it is not that the assessing officer shall direct. So whenever this word may has been used, the courts have said that it is recommendatory. That is first. Secondly, if you read that classic judgment of Honorable Supreme Court, 83 ITR 26, though it is rendered in the context of some other law, that is sales tax, but the principles which are emerging from there are very, very important. And that principles can be applied because of the user of the word may. What is this Supreme Court says? It says, as order imposing penalty for failure to carrying out a statutory obligation is the result of quasi-criminal proceeding, and penalty will not ordinarily be imposed unless the party obliged either acted deliberately in defiance of law or was guilty of conduct contumacious or dishonest or acted or in conscious disregard of its obligation. Penalty will not also be imposed merely because it is lawful to do so. So, I mean, unless two things again, it is not automatic. There has to be proved guilty of misconduct. Whether penalty should be imposed for failure to perform or statutory obligation is a matter of discretion of the authority to be exercised judiciously and considering all facts and circumstances. So three, 4 things we can immediately pick up and can apply here also. Second, we can take the benefit of the judgment of Honorable Supreme Court also in the case of Woodward Governor. Very, very important judgment that assessing officer has to see the person authority, levying the authority see. Though the embargo or the hurdle here is that there is no parallel provision as is there in the income tax law governed in section 273B, which talks about reasonable cause. So the BMA officer may put forth an argument that, look, there is no parallel provision as 273B. So I will not give that benefit. But still, the way the act has been created, the way it is using the word may direct. And also one more reason, sir. The reason is the procedure for levying the penalty is given here. And the procedure say the authority shall give the opportunity of hearing. Kindly read subsection 3 of section 46. It says, no order imposing a penalty under this chapter shall be made unless the assessee has been given an opportunity of being heard. Since the opportunity has been made mandatory, what is the purpose of opportunity? Purpose is that you see the circumstances, you see what was the cause, whether there the things happened beyond the reasons, beyond the control of the assessee. If yes, then it has to be judicially exercised. It is in your discretion. That is why section 46 is there. Then it also talks about an order imposing a penalty shall be made with the approval. So what for the approval? Now the approval, there are many judgments. It is based upon application of mind. So the other authority has also to see whether it is a fit case for levy of penalty. When two authorities are applying mind for what? It would have been simply said the tax will be at the rate of 120%. No, they did not say that. They said tax will be 30%, penalty will be 90%. That is my considered opinion, sir. Law will definitely evolve. Then bar means the time limit. Time limit is there. No order imposing a penalty under this chapter shall be passed after the expiry of a period of 1 year from the end of the financial year in which the notice for imposition of penalty. But initiation of penalty, no time limit as such has been prescribed. This levy, I mean, this is the time limit for passing the order once it is initiated. Then I am skipping this. Then offenses and prosecution. I will not be dealing in detail because it is already 8 o'clock and I mean, just 5 minutes left. So again, prosecution also, friends, again, similar things. Therefore, the same thing for which penalty is there. Now, there are rigorous imprisonment provisions, 6 months to 7 years. And the officer who have been authorized are commissioner and chief commissioner. So it is as the, I mean, sorry, I forgot to tell the authority for penalty. I mean, it is assessing officer in most of the cases. In last case, it is only any authority. So for the earlier, it is assessing officer only, unlike income tax where CIT appeal has been empowered, here only assessing officer under BMA only has been empowered. But for prosecution, only commissioner or chief commissioner. At his instance only, prosecution may start. Now, many questions arise with regard to prosecution. At what stage it can be, whether only finalization of tax or penalty. So answer to that is no, it can simultaneously, if he has sufficient material to raise complaint, he can make a complaint. But one important issue here is that he should add requisite material. I mean, he has to grant sanction of prosecution. Second important part, which friends you must take care of is, there is one important distinction between the income tax prosecution and prosecution here. And that distinction is that under the income tax law, it is specifically provided that offense there is bailable. Here it is not provided. So some of the officers are presuming that it is not bailable, non-bailable, meaning thereby bail will be subject to the discretion of the court. So we are handling few prosecution matters. Therein courts have granted bail so far, but bail will have to be obtained. So it needs to be a great degree of precaution needs to be taken here. Then very important thing that like we have section 278E under income tax law. We have section 54 here also, which says there will be presumption as to the culpable mental state. So the word prosecution, wherever these sections are using willfully, but again, they are neutralizing the effect of word willful by saying that we will presume it was willful. So the guilty mind will be presumed. It will be a defense of the person that he proves that he did not have guilty mind. Very, very important provision. And we can have a separate lecture on this presumption part only. I am thinking of writing an article itself on guilty mind, that our Shastras believe that whosoever is born is a pure soul with pure mind. But unfortunately, our fiscal laws always begin with this presumption. No, you have a guilty mind. You proved you are not guilty mind. And also attacking the fundamental concept of our constitution also, which says that a person is innocent unless proved guilty, and the burden to prove guilty is upon the person who is alleging it. So, I mean, all those things have been shaken here. Then very, very important thing, sir. The assessing officer has been made empowered to recover the tax like anything, section 31, 32, etc. Not only from the assessee, and if he does not pay, he will be assessing default, but and he can issue garnishing notice to the debtor also. And if debtor does not pay, he will become assessee in default. I mean, very, very harsh provisions are there. And he will be recovered not only the tax amount, but also again 30% penalty. I mean, very strange. Then friends, with regard to tax administration, these are more or less on the parallel powers as under income tax law. The powers under CPC have been given, but search and seizure powers have not been given, nor these have been given under Benami law, because they have created investigation wing, which is now catering to BMA and as well as PPPT Act. That's the Benami. Then I'm skipping, then assessment. Now the assessment section is very, very funny and strange section. I mean, it has again no boundaries. We have assessment section under section 143 of income tax, which has some boundaries. Some section 143(2) is there, which creates any boundaries. They say, I mean, strangely drafted for the purpose of making an assessment or reassessment under this act. The assessing officer may, on receipt of any information from an income tax authority, all right, understandable, under income tax act, or under authority under any law, all right. If any authority is to be included, that what was the need to make income tax authority, then you say any authority. Then not only that, then it says for that, and then it says or coming from any information. Then why don't you begin from this only, that any information coming from anywhere in the Brahmand, even from vacuum, even from dreams, you mention this, and then he can serve on any notice. So any information comes anytime in life, he can serve on any person a notice requiring him on a date to be specified to produce or cost to be produced, and then all this rigmarole starts. So then you produce the evidence, and then in the same manner as income tax proceedings start. And then he can make inquiries, and then do the assessment. There are some time limits which are there. Time limits are not for initiating the assessment, for completing. So for completion, they have bound. Okay, once you start, immediately complete, because we have to recover tax. Don't make it open-ended. So then they have given the time limit 2 years from the end of the financial years. Roughly speaking, roughly not more than 3 years time limit is there in different situations. Then rectification of mistake powers are there. We can skip, not very important. The notice of demand will be issued. Then appeals. So appellate mechanism is same as CIT appeal and tribunal. So first appeal to CIT appeal, different fee, different forms have been prescribed. 30 days, 60 days, 120 days, time limit is there. Somebody was saying the tribunal has not been given power to condone. That is very unfortunate part. So I am skipping for the time being. Then certain few more important provisions I will touch, and then we can go ahead. So first of all, section 215 is very important, which says that all other words and expressions used herein but not defined in the Income Tax Act shall have the meanings respectively assigned to them in that act. Then definition of beneficial owner and beneficiary, I have already said that we have to pick up from 139. Then circulars, very many important circulars are there. Then section 72C I have already used. I mean, it has got really wide ramifications when it reads. Section 72 says that where any asset has been acquired or made prior to amendment of this act and no declaration in respect of such asset is made under this chapter, such asset shall be deemed to have been acquired or made in the year in which a notice under section 10 is issued by the assessing officer, and provisions of this act shall apply accordingly. So friends, I'm really not able to decipher the extent to which it will hit, because to my mind, it has many flaws. The first flaw is, first of all, it is saying, using the word any asset. What do you mean by any asset? You should first of all say any undisclosed asset. Then you should say asset located outside India. I mean, what asset you are talking about? Somebody may reply, asset in the context of this law. So everywhere they have used the proper word, undisclosed foreign asset, undisclosed foreign income. Here suddenly then it is being inserted in chapter 6, which is concerning declaration only, but it is having an open-ended scope. Then it is contradicting the first proviso to section 3.1. First proviso says tax will be in the year in which it is it comes to the notice of the assessing officer, their personal knowledge. Now it says no, whenever the notice is issued, it will be deemed to be acquired in that year. So one thing is contradicting in the other. I don't know to achieve what. Then few important judicial pronouncements. Karti Chidambaram, you know that the Supreme Court has said revised return can be filed, and if proper disclosure has been made, then the officers are duty bound and to take care of that. And I mean, though it is pending in Supreme Court, but this is very important judgment to read. Then this judgment I wanted to read of Calcutta High Court, wherein one associate took a plea that he has inherited from his mother, so therefore he is not duty bound to disclose. They said no. You are also, once you inherit it, it becomes your asset, then you disclose in your return. If you do not disclose, you are liable for these kind of provisions under BMA. Then the double jeopardy contention has been rejected by Honorable Calcutta High Court. I quite often say that it is sometimes said that double jeopardy. It is not always double jeopardy. Double jeopardy is when for the same offense, two punishments are being there. But it is quite possible that within the same facts, different elements of law are taking place. That is why I say income tax can also arise. Benami also arise. Money laundering also arise. BMA also can arise. I can explain with the help of some examples whenever we have sufficient time. Then Gautam Khaitan's judgment. It is allowing the retrospective to take place. But the limited issue therein was retrospectivity for the purpose of this declaration scheme only. Retrospective of various other laws as a whole, that is according to me still open, and we must challenge if the need is there. Then one last question which is coming to my mind is, suppose an asset which is no more in existence today, the undisclosed income only of the current years can only be taken. Undisclosed asset which was acquired earlier, even prior to 2015, if exists today, can be taken into consideration. But an exist prior to 2015, no more existing, that is a big question. And according to me, there are various things which might suggest it may not be taken. Some people say it can be taken. I would not like to deal with this question today for some reasons, because provisions are vague. Though I have some things to say, but time is up. I have already closed 8 p.m. And whenever Rajesh Bhai will permit us again, we can meet again. But today, I would say I am really thankful from the core of my heart for giving such a patient hearing to me and for such a keen participation. Thank you very much, friends.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your